Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a really big question, all from a specific theological point of view. What is the adversary's ultimate agenda, and what's the key to overcoming it? We're going to distill a sermon on spiritual freedom into a clear, actionable framework for you. So we're breaking down the core concepts from a sermon by Apostle Joshua Selman on complete deliverance. And the whole thing is really built around this central idea of freedom. So that's where we're going to start. To really get our heads around this perspective, we're going to follow a pretty clear roadmap. We'll kick things off with why this study is even considered important. Then we'll look at the adversary's origin story, his ultimate motivation, and finally, the path to freedom that's proposed. Okay, let's start with the why. So first up, why focus on this at all? I mean, it seems a bit dark, right? Well, the sermon starts by making the case that to achieve real spiritual freedom, you first have to understand the nature of what you're up against. Yeah, there's actually a name for this field of study, demonology. And the argument in the sermon is that this is a necessary part of a balanced spiritual diet, you could say. It's not something to be afraid of, but a subject that demands knowledge. To really drive this point home, the sermon uses this powerful analogy. A pilot can't just learn how to fly. They have to study what makes planes crash to become an expert at flying safety. In the same way, spiritual knowledge is positioned as the essential first step towards spiritual safety. So, how do we know this isn't just some fringe idea? Well, the sermon proposes this really fascinating logical framework to check if any teaching is a core doctrine. It has to pass these 3 tests. And it applies these tests directly to the study of Satan to see if it holds up. And what it finds is that, this topic passes with flying colors. You see it right from the beginning in Genesis. It's absolutely central to Jesus' ministry, and it carries on all the way through the early church. The point being, this is not a minor side story. It's a consistent thread woven through the whole biblical narrative. Okay, so we've established why this study is seen as so important. Now let's get into the who. The origin story here is absolutely key to understanding the motivations we're going to talk about later. Now, this is a really critical distinction in this theological framework. The sermon puts a huge emphasis on this point. Satan is not some eternal opposite force to God. He is a created being. That changes the entire dynamic. And you can see this whole transformation just by looking at his names. Before his rebellion, his titles were just incredible. Light bearer, covering cherub. After the fall, they become things like the adversary and the accuser, which basically define his new, twisted purpose. So what caused this? What was the trigger for this catastrophic fall? The sermon points to one thing: pride. A pride that grew from his own beauty and wisdom until it actually corrupted the very wisdom he possessed. And this burning ambition, this desire to elevate himself to be like God, is what ultimately kicked off a war in heaven. A war that ended with him being cast out, which, of course, sets the stage for everything that follows. This brings us to the most crucial point in this whole explainer. What has been driving the adversary ever since that fall? What is his ultimate #1 endgame? Because according to this teaching, nothing he does is random. It's not just chaos for the sake of chaos. It's all driven by a singular, powerful motivation. And here they are. The sermon argues that absolutely everything the adversary does is to achieve these 2 things: dominion, that's gaining control over the kingdoms and systems of the world, and allegiance, the burning desire to be worshipped. And if you want this smoking gun, look no further than the temptation of Jesus in the wilderness. It's all laid bare right here. Satan offers Jesus all the kingdoms of the world, total dominion, for one thing in return: worship. He literally shows his entire hand in this one moment. And this one idea, this right here, reframes the entire conflict. The sermon's thesis is that the main battle isn't against God directly because he knows he can't win that fight. No, the primary target is humanity because God gave us the dominion that he so desperately wants back. So if that's the problem, what's the solution? This brings us to the final part of the sermon, the whole concept of deliverance. If that's the adversary's strategy, what's the counter strategy? To really underscore how important this is, the source points to how often these words pop up in Scripture. I mean, deliver appears nearly 600 times, and deliverance over 170 times. The suggestion here is that this is a major, major biblical theme, not a minor one. And here is a really key distinction. Deliverance isn't talked about as just a one-time ritual or an event. It's framed as an ongoing state of being.
It's a freedom that you achieve and then maintain through knowledge and your spiritual authority.
So this is the path to freedom that the sermon lays out. And notice where it starts. It all begins with understanding the why behind the fight. The big insight is seeing that attacks on your health or your family or your finances aren't the end goal. They're just a tactic, a strategy to get your allegiance. And knowing that is the first step to dismantling the whole thing. So in the end, this entire theological framework is really built on one powerful premise. Knowledge is your primary weapon. Understanding who the adversary is, what he wants, and why he wants it, that's positioned as the absolute key to taking apart his strategy.
And that leaves us with a final, pretty provocative question. If you started to view your everyday struggles, not as random events or just bad luck, but through this lens, as a constant battle for your allegiance, how would that change your perspective on everything? Thanks for joining us.